There's a particular kind of silence that lives inside a happy marriage. Not the cold, stiff silence of people who have run out of things to say, but the warm, settled quiet of two people who don't need to fill every moment with noise. The silence of someone breathing next to you in the dark. The silence of a coffee cup set on the counter just the way you like it. That was the silence I thought we had. I was wrong. My name is Ethan. I'm 38 years old, and for 10 years I believed I was one of the lucky ones. I work in urban planning, the kind of job most people glaze over when you explain it at dinner parties, but that I genuinely love. I spend my days thinking about how cities breathe, how roads move people, how a single badly placed intersection can quietly ruin a neighborhood for decades. There's a satisfaction in solving problems that most people never even notice exist. I'm methodical. Patient. I look at a map and see patterns. I thought that skill translated to the rest of my life. I thought I was good at reading things clearly. Lisa and I met at 27. She was finishing a graduate degree in marketing, sitting across from me at a mutual friend's dinner table, arguing with absolute conviction that the redesign of a city's public transit signage was a political act. I disagreed with half of what she said and found myself completely unable to look away from her. That was the beginning. By 28 we were living together. By 29 we were married in a courtyard garden with 40 people watching us make promises in the late afternoon light. For years, those promises felt easy. She was warm in ways I wasn't. Where I got quiet under pressure, she got animated. Where I catalogued and considered, she felt and moved and decided. We balanced each other in the way people write about in anniversary cards, genuinely, not as a performance. She made our apartment feel inhabited. She remembered the names of my colleagues' children. She called my mother on her birthday before I did, every single year. That was Lisa. Or at least, that was the version of Lisa I thought I knew. The first thing I remember noticing, the thing that, in hindsight, should have let myself actually notice, was the phone. It started small. Not the kind of small you write down, the kind you file away without meaning to. A Tuesday evening in January. She was sitting on the sofa with her legs folded under her, a glass of wine on the armrest, scrolling through her phone with the screen tilted just slightly away from me. It was a habit I'd seen 100 times. Except this time, when I glanced over from the kitchen counter, she turned the screen face down in one smooth, reflexive motion. So fast. Not guilty fast, just fast. The way you might swat an insect. Automatic. She looked up and smiled at me. Easy, warm, real-looking. "You want more wine?" she asked. "Sure," I said. And that was it. I didn't ask. Not because I didn't want to, but because I'd already told myself a story about what it was. A work message she'd deal with later. A thread she was tired of explaining. Maybe a gift for me she didn't want me to see. People have private thoughts. People have private phones. I was not the kind of husband who monitored his wife's screen. I was proud of that. I shouldn't have been. Looking back now, that was the first moment I chose comfort over clarity. It cost me everything. We went to bed that night with the television murmuring in the background and her head against my shoulder, and I remember feeling, sincerely and completely, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had no idea that the ground beneath that feeling had already started to shift. Lisa worked at a mid-size brand consultancy downtown. She'd been there 6 years, had worked her way up to senior account manager, and genuinely seemed to love it. She talked about her clients the way athletes talk about training, with a kind of focused energy that made it clear this wasn't just a job for her. It was an identity. That part of her had always been consistent. What changed, gradually, was not the job itself but the time it required. Or so she told me. The first, late night, was a Thursday in February. She texted at 4 in the afternoon, "Big presentation prep, don't wait up," and arrived home just after 11, smelling of wine and cold air, animated in a way that struck me as slightly off for someone who just spent 7 hours in a conference room. Not wrong. Just slightly off. The kind of detail you notice and then immediately discount because you're not the kind of person who keeps score. How was it? I asked from the couch. Exhausting, she said, kicking off her heels. But good. We really nailed the deck. She came and kissed me on the top of the head, the way she always did, and went to shower. I turned back to the television. I want to say I felt something. I want to say some animal instinct fired in the back of my skull and I knew, right then. But that's not true. The truth is more ordinary and more humiliating. I felt nothing. I was just a man watching television while his wife showered, and the world was exactly as it appeared to be. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with red lights and sirens. It slips in quietly, dressed like a Thursday evening, and hangs its coat on the hook next to yours, and you make room for it because you think it belongs there. March brought longer days and a pattern I hadn't yet recognized as a pattern. Thursdays became the new frequency. Not every Thursday, that would have been too obvious, even for someone as determinately unobservant as I was at the time. But enough. A meeting that ran long. A client dinner downtown. A team drinks thing she wasn't excited about but felt obligated to attend. Always something plausible. Always something that made complete sense in isolation. She started dressing differently for work. Not dramatically. No sudden wardrobe overhaul. Just, more carefully. The kind of careful that used to be reserved for client presentations and date nights and her sister's wedding. A particular perfume she hadn't worn in years appeared on the bathroom shelf. She started straightening her hair on days she used to pull it back without thinking. I noticed. I chose not to assign meaning to what I noticed. We had a good marriage. I kept telling myself that. We laughed. We cooked together on weekends. We talked about the future, vaguely, the way people do when they assume the future is settled and doesn't require a specific plan. I didn't register that our conversations had grown slightly shallower, that she was present in the room but somehow farther away, that the silences between us had changed their character from warm to something else. Something with a faint draft in it. I told myself it was stress. Her job was demanding. Mine was too, in stretches. This was just a season. I was building an entire architecture of denial, one quiet decision at a time, because I understood somewhere below the level of language that if I started asking real questions, I might get real answers, and some part of me wasn't ready for that. That's not weakness. That's just what love does to you. It makes the cost of knowing too high, for a while. And so you choose not to know. But March gave me one detail I couldn't quite dissolve, no matter how much I tried. Her phone died during dinner one evening, she hadn't charged it, and she asked to use mine to text the team about a timeline change. She typed quickly, eyes focused, and when she handed it back I caught a name at the top of the conversation thread she'd opened. Not a group chat. A single contact. James. Just a name. Could be anyone. A colleague. A client. An old friend. Who's James? I asked, aiming for casual and landing somewhere just south of it. She glanced up. Something, infinitesimal, fast as a blink, moved across her face. Then it was gone. The project lead on the Henderson account, she said. You'd find him incredibly boring. He talks about golf constantly. She smiled. It was a perfect smile. Right, I said. Sorry, I wasn't snooping, I know you weren't, she said, reaching across and squeezing my hand. You never do. She meant it as a compliment. I think, in that moment, she was also counting on it. April arrived cold and overcast, the kind of spring that forgets what it's supposed to be doing. I remember it that way because the weather seemed to match something I couldn't name, a persistent low-level gray in my perception of things that I kept trying to attribute to work stress, to sleep, to the ordinary slow friction of being almost 40. Not to anything specific. Not to Lisa. My friend Mark called me on a Wednesday afternoon, just to catch up. We'd been close since university, the kind of close that survives distance and years and all the ways people change without becoming strangers. He was living 20 minutes away, working in architecture, occasionally joining us for dinners that always ran 2 hours longer than planned because none of us wanted the evening to end. He knew Lisa well. He liked her, genuinely. That's important to remember. "You seem off," he said, maybe 10 minutes into the call. "I'm fine," I said. "Tired." "You always say that when you don't want to have the actual conversation." "Mark. I'm just saying. Call me if you need anything." I remember holding the phone after we hung up and thinking that Mark was perceptive in ways I sometimes found uncomfortable. He saw things in people quickly, assembled impressions from details others missed. I'd always admired it. Right then, it made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. Because if Mark was sensing something from a 10-minute phone call, what was he sensing? And why did it feel, just slightly, like a warning? I pushed it aside. I made dinner. Lisa came home on time that evening, and we ate together and talked about a documentary she wanted to watch, and the evening was entirely unremarkable. Which, I told myself, was evidence that everything was fine. It wasn't evidence of anything. The second Thursday of April was when the phone became impossible to ignore. I was already in bed, half reading, when Lisa came out of the bathroom and picked up her phone from the nightstand. She read something, and I saw it, the smile. Not the easy, warm smile she gave me. Something different. Private. Involuntary. The kind of smile that happens before the person wearing it can decide whether it should. She caught herself. She put the phone down. She climbed into bed and said, "Long day," and turned off the light on her side. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask who texted. I had no right to ask, technically. We'd never been the kind of couple who demanded access to each other's phones, and I wasn't about to become that now. But the smile stayed with me. Specific and unshared. Like something I wasn't supposed to see. Looking back, that was the moment I called it innocent without actually believing it. I named it something harmless because the alternative, the real name for it, was something I couldn't hold yet. The week that followed was outwardly normal, which made the strangeness harder to locate. She was attentive, present, warm. She brought home flowers on a Friday for no reason. She suggested we take a weekend trip somewhere in early June, a place on the coast we'd talked about visiting for years. We spent an evening looking at cottages online, her leaning against my arm, and it felt completely real. Which was the problem? It all felt real. None of it looked like a lie from the inside. And yet. She went out that Saturday afternoon, an errand, she said, a dry cleaning pickup and something for her sister. She was gone 2.5 hours. The dry cleaner was 8 minutes away. Her sister lived in the same direction. 2.5 hours. I didn't time it deliberately. I just happened to notice. I happened to notice a lot of things that month, and every time, I offered each one a perfectly reasonable explanation, filed it away under coincidence or stress or nothing, and kept moving. I was constructing a monument to selective blindness, and I was doing it with tremendous, unconscious effort. May changed the texture of things. Lisa started working out. Not unusually, she'd always been active, cycling on weekends, the occasional yoga class. But this was different in frequency and in the way she talked about it, which was not at all. She mentioned the gym twice, both times briefly, both times in the context of something else, as if the information was incidental. New gym bag. New leggings she didn't model for me the way she usually would have. She just wore them. The phone remained a wall between us, present and unreachable. She'd taken to keeping it face down on every surface. She charged it in the kitchen overnight rather than on the nightstand. When I walked into a room where she was texting, the screen angled away in that same automatic gesture I'd first noticed in January. I understand now that I was receiving a continuous, clear message. I understand that no reasonable person, looking at this list of details from the outside, would call it ambiguous. But I was not on the outside. I was on the inside of a decade of trust, and trust is its own kind of blindness. It reframes evidence. It softens angles. It says, you know this person, and you know she wouldn't. I stopped saying that to myself sometime in mid-May. I didn't replace it with anything. I just stopped. One evening I asked her directly, not about James, not about anything specific, just, are you happy? She looked at me for a moment longer than the question required. Of course, she said. Why? I don't know. You seem somewhere else lately. Work is intense right now. She tilted her head slightly. Are you okay? You seem worried about something. She turned it. Gently, smoothly, completely. A question about her became a question about me, and I answered it, and the conversation ended without having happened. That was the moment I first thought the word lie clearly and without flinching. Not accusation. Not certainty. Just the word, appearing in my mind the way a word does when the brain has been building toward it for months. Lie. I slept badly that night for the first time in years. I called Mark on a Sunday morning in late May. Not to tell him anything. Just to hear his voice, have coffee, keep myself grounded. He came over, and we sat on the back porch with the garden doing nothing in particular behind us, and we talked about everything except the thing I was thinking about. His work, my projects, a shared friend's recent relocation. He was easy company. He'd always been easy company. At some point, without planning to, I said, do you ever get the sense that someone is in a version of their life that doesn't include you? He looked at me. Careful. Who are we talking about? No one. Generically. Ethan. It's nothing. He didn't push. He just sat with it, the way Mark did, patient with silences, unwilling to fill them with noise. After a while he said, if you ever need anything, you know you can call me. I know, I said. Thank you. We left it there. But I could see he'd heard something in what I said, filed it, and was carrying it with him when he left. The June Thursday that broke something open was the fourth one of the month. Lisa had mentioned a client dinner 2 days in advance, which was new. Usually these things were announced same day. She seemed lighter that week in a way that should have been easy to mistake for good news, a deal closed, a project approved. But lightness and guilt can look similar from certain angles, and I was beginning to develop new angles. She left at 6:15. The restaurant, she said, was downtown, the same area where her office was. French place. Long dinner, probably. I told her to have a good time. She kissed my cheek and left, and I stood in the kitchen for a long time after the door closed, doing nothing. Then I went to my laptop and looked at our shared calendar. She'd added the dinner 3 days ago. Client dinner, J. Henderson. Henderson. The same account James worked on. James. The project lead. The one who talked constantly about golf. I sat with that for exactly 7 minutes, I remember, because I was watching the kitchen clock without meaning to, and then I did something I had never done in 10 years of marriage. I picked up my keys and I followed my wife. I'm not proud of it. It sits uneasily with my sense of who I am. But I also can't claim I was wrong to do it. I drove downtown, parked 2 blocks from the restaurant district she'd mentioned, and walked. It was still light out, the kind of long June evening that makes cities feel briefly forgiving. I didn't know which restaurant. I walked slowly, looking. I found them at table 4. The restaurant had tall windows facing the street. I saw her before she saw me, of course she did, she wasn't looking for anyone. She was leaning forward slightly, both elbows on the table, talking with her hands the way she did when she was fully engaged. And across from her, a man. Mid-40s, maybe. Dark jacket. Good-looking in a straightforward way. Smiling at something she'd just said. And then she laughed, that full, complete laugh, and reached across the table and touched his hand. He turned his hand over and held hers. I stood on the sidewalk in the June evening and watched my wife hold another man's hand across a restaurant table, and the world continued around me without pausing for even a moment to acknowledge that something had just been destroyed. I didn't go in. Not yet. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with both hands flat on the steering wheel. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. I thought I would shake. What I felt was more like the particular stillness of a place after an earthquake has passed, everything rearranged, nothing recognizable, all that damage sitting in complete, eerie quiet. I sat in that car for 40 minutes. Then I drove home, and I waited. She came home at 11. Faintly flushed. Happy in that private way. How was it? I asked. Really good, she said. Productive. She went to brush her teeth. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I had seen her hold another man's hand. She had just called it productive. I understood then that denial isn't weakness. It's a decision. You choose it because the alternative costs more than you're ready to pay. I had been paying the toll of not knowing for months, telling myself the currency was patience. It wasn't. It was cowardice dressed in the language of trust. And now I had seen something I couldn't unsee, and the transaction was finally, completely closed. I didn't confront her that night. I needed to know more. Not for argument's sake. Not to build a case. Just because some part of me still couldn't fully believe it, and I needed the remaining doubt removed before I said anything that couldn't be taken back. The following day I called in sick to work, a thing I had done exactly twice in 4 years, and sat at my kitchen table with a coffee going cold beside me and thought with the kind of focused, slow precision I usually reserved for infrastructure problems. I needed to know who James was. I found him without difficulty. Lisa's company had a staff directory on their website, accessible, public, professional headshots included. James. I scrolled through the senior account team and there he was. James. Dark jacket in the photo. The same jaw. The same face I'd seen across table 4. He was a director. 3 years with the firm. His bio mentioned clients in the Henderson portfolio. So that part of Lisa's story was true, he did work at the company, he was on the Henderson account, they had professional contact. Which meant every lie she'd told me had been structurally attached to something real, something verifiable, something I could check and find accurate. That's how the best lies work. They don't invent a different world. They use the real one as a scaffold and build just slightly off to one side. I spent 2 days constructing a careful picture. Not obsessive, careful. I wasn't accessing anything I shouldn't. I was simply paying attention to what was available, and to the patterns in what she told me versus what I could verify. The Henderson client dinner I'd witnessed? I checked. The Henderson account had a proposal due the following week. That was real. But the dinner wasn't listed anywhere in the team calendar she occasionally synced with our shared household calendar for scheduling purposes. A real client dinner, at a firm her size, would have generated at least one internal calendar invite. There was nothing. It was a cover story wearing professional clothing. And then, the morning of the 3rd day, my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. Ethan. I need to show you something. Can we meet? We met at a coffee shop near his office, a place we'd been dozens of times. He was already there when I arrived. He didn't look comfortable. He had his phone on the table, face down, and he was turning it over and over in one hand the way people do when they're deciding something. "Someone sent me this," he said. "I think you need to see it." He slid the phone across to me. It was a photograph. Taken from a distance, slightly grainy, but clear enough. A restaurant patio. Lisa, in a green dress I recognized, leaning her head against a man's shoulder. His hand was around her waist. His face was partially turned away, but the jacket and the build were unmistakable. The photo was time-stamped. 3 weeks ago. A Thursday. I looked at it for a long time. Then I set the phone down carefully on the table. "Who sent it to you?" I asked. Mark shook his head slightly. "I don't know. Anonymous number." "But Ethan." "I know," I said. "I know." He watched me. Steady. Not uncomfortable with the silence now, just, with me, fully, in that moment the way he always was. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know what to do. I kept thinking maybe it wasn't." "It's him," I said. "Her colleague. James. I saw them myself a few nights ago." Mark exhaled slowly. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to pretend I haven't seen it." We sat there a long time after that, the coffee cooling, the mid-morning city moving around us, and I felt the strange, terrible clarity of a person who has run out of reasons to doubt. I had spent years being good at the wrong things, at keeping the peace, at not asking, at making everything look fine from the outside. I was expert at maintenance. I had no idea how to handle the moment when the thing you'd been maintaining simply wasn't there anymore. I had the photograph now. I had my own witness. I had the pattern of Thursdays, the private smiles, the face-down phone, the perfume on the bathroom shelf, the name in a text thread at dinner. I had the dinner at table 4. I had 10 years of a marriage I thought I understood. What I also had, and what complicated everything for approximately 48 hours, was a version of James that didn't quite fit. I spent an afternoon reading everything publicly available about him. Awards. Conference appearances. Quoted in a trade publication about account management strategy. His LinkedIn showed the kind of career that involved real intelligence and genuine work. He'd been at other firms before Lisa's. He was not, by any visible measure, a predator or a reckless person. Which meant either he knew exactly what he was doing and simply didn't care, or he'd persuaded himself that what was happening was somehow acceptable, somehow distinct from the category of thing it clearly was. Neither option made me feel better. But it made the situation harder to reduce to simple villainy. Lisa hadn't been seduced by someone obviously dangerous. She'd made a series of choices alongside someone she presumably respected, possibly cared about, in whatever distorted way that caring had organized itself. That realization was its own kind of pain. Not louder than the rest of the pain, just different. More complicated. Harder to set down. On the 4th day, I made a decision. I was going to go back to the restaurant. I was going to let Thursday happen one more time. But this time, it was going to end differently. The next Thursday I went to work as normal. I responded to emails, attended a 2-hour planning review, ate lunch at my desk. I called my mother in the early afternoon, just to hear her voice, not to say anything, and she asked if I was sleeping enough, the way mothers do, and I told her yes and meant it as kindly as I could. Lisa had mentioned, that morning over breakfast, that she had a dinner with a client group. She said it in the practiced, easy tone that had once meant simply I have a work dinner and now meant something I couldn't think about without my jaw tightening. "What time will you be back?" I asked. "Probably 10:30, she said. "Okay." I poured more coffee. "Have a good evening." She looked at me for just a moment longer than necessary. Something moved in her expression, a flicker of I don't know what. Then she picked up her bag and left. I sat in the empty apartment for an hour. I turned my wedding ring over and over on my finger. 10 years of it. 10 years of automatic, unconscious presence on my hand. I thought about the day she put it on, the garden, the 40 people, the late afternoon light. I thought about the first apartment we shared, how we'd assembled a bookshelf incorrectly and laughed about it until neither of us could breathe. I thought about a Sunday morning 2 winters ago when we'd stayed in bed until noon reading, not talking, just existing side by side in perfect, unremarkable peace. Then I thought about table 4. I took the ring off. I held it in my palm for a moment. Then I put it in my shirt pocket and drove downtown. I arrived at the restaurant at 8:45. I'd chosen the time deliberately, late enough that they'd be settled, early enough that the evening wouldn't be ending. I walked in through the front entrance, past the host stand, and scanned the room. They were there. Table 4, same table, same configuration of the world. Lisa in a navy dress. James across from her. Candlelight between them, a bottle of wine, the remnants of a first course. She was talking, and he was watching her the way people watch someone they want to keep watching. I approached the host. A young woman in her mid-20s, professional and attentive. I wonder if you could do something for me, I said quietly. I explained what I needed. She looked at me for a moment, uncertain, reading my face, and then something in my expression settled her. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't about to make a scene. I was simply a man who needed something delivered to a table. I took the ring from my pocket. I placed it on the small folded card she offered me. I didn't write anything. I just put the ring there. She walked to table 4. I watched from near the bar. She set the card in front of Lisa, said something brief, and stepped back. Lisa looked down at the table. She opened the card. And she saw the ring. I saw the color leave her face. She looked up from the table, scanning the room, and her eyes found me standing 20 feet away. That moment, the moment of eye contact, lasted perhaps 3 seconds and felt like the length of an entire different life. I walked toward the table. James had turned now, following her gaze. He looked at me with an expression that was a strange combination of recognition and the beginning of shame. I stopped at the edge of the table. I looked at Lisa. Her eyes were wide, shining, her hands very still on either side of her wine glass. I'm not going to make a scene, I said. My voice was calm. I was surprised by how calm it was. I just want you to know that I know. And I want you to know that I saw it myself. You didn't have to tell me and you didn't, so I'm not going to thank you for honesty you didn't offer. She opened her mouth. I held up one hand, not aggressive, just, not yet. I'm going home, I said. We can talk when you're ready to come home too. Tonight or whenever. I looked at James for exactly 2 seconds. He didn't say anything. There was nothing for him to say. I turned and walked out of the restaurant. Outside, the June evening was warm. City sounds. Traffic. Somewhere nearby, music from a bar with the door open. I walked to my car and I drove home and I made myself a cup of tea and I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment and I waited. She came home at 10:15. I heard her key in the lock. She walked into the kitchen and saw me at the table. She was carrying the card with the ring in both hands, like something she didn't know how to put down. Her face was a complicated architecture of things, guilt, fear, grief, and underneath all of it, something that looked almost like relief. She sat down across from me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I suspected for months, I said. I knew for certain about a week ago. She closed her eyes. I'm so sorry. The words were genuine. I'm still certain of that. The sorry was real. It just didn't reach far enough to cover what it was apologizing for. "Tell me the truth," I said. "All of it." She did. It had begun in October, which meant it had been 7 months, not the 8 I'd counted, but close enough that the difference didn't matter. A work trip, a hotel bar, the particular vulnerability of being away from home with someone who paid full attention to you. James. They'd told themselves it was a single night, then told themselves it was under control, then stopped telling themselves anything. She hadn't meant to fall in love with him. She said that phrase and then immediately seemed to hear what she'd said and looked at me with an expression of pure anguish. "Are you in love with him?" I asked. The pause was brief. "I don't know," she said. I was confused. "I'm still confused." "That's honest," I said. "Thank you for that much." She began to cry then. Not performance, real crying, the ugly kind. She said she hadn't wanted to hurt me. She said she didn't understand how it had gotten so far. She said she hadn't meant for any of it to happen. She said she still loved me, that she'd never stopped, that she wanted to fix it, that she would do anything. I listened to all of it. I gave her every word. What I didn't do was feel what I think she hoped I would feel. The grief was there, absolutely. But under it, something had solidified. Not anger. Not contempt. Just a very quiet, very certain knowledge that some things, once they've happened, cannot be unaudit. Some thresholds, once crossed, don't have a return path that leads back to the same place. "I need you to stay somewhere else tonight," I said. "Take what you need for a few days." She looked at me. "Ethan. I'm not throwing you out. I'm not ending anything tonight. I just need space. Real space. Not the space of a lie." She nodded. She went to the bedroom. I heard the sounds of a bag being packed, quiet, careful, as if noise might make things worse. She came back through the kitchen with a rolling bag and her coat over her arm. She stopped at the table. "I love you," she said. That was never the lie. "I know," I said. She left. I sat in the kitchen until well past midnight. Then I went to the sofa, not the bedroom, not yet, and lay there in the dark, and somewhere around 2 in the morning I fell into something that was close enough to sleep. The week that followed was the strangest of my adult life. The apartment had a quality I'd never felt in it before, not emptiness exactly, more like the charged stillness of a room where something has just been removed. I moved through it carefully, as if the floor might have changed. Mark came over on the second day. He brought food, which was exactly the right thing to bring, and we sat at the kitchen table and he listened while I told him everything in a linear, factual way that surprised me with its steadiness. I wasn't performing composure. I was just calm. In the bone-deep, post-crisis way of someone who has been braced for impact for so long that the actual impact came as a kind of release. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I think I'm going to be okay." "You will be," he said. Without sentimentality, just flat certainty. That's what good friends do. Lisa called on day 3. She was staying with her sister, she said. She'd told her sister only that we were going through something difficult. She wanted to talk. She wanted to explain things better than she had. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground, her suggestion, which I appreciated, on a gray Thursday afternoon that had the dark irony of having become our significant day. She looked tired. Honest tired, not performative. She'd thought a great deal, she said. She'd spoken to a therapist. She knew she had done something that couldn't be explained away or minimized. She wasn't asking for that. She was asking whether there was a possibility, any possibility, of working through this together. Couples counseling. Complete honesty. Whatever it took. She meant all of it. I could see she meant it. I sat with my coffee and I thought about what she was offering. Not just in that moment, but over the days that followed. I genuinely considered it. I owe her, and myself, that honesty. I turned the possibility over with the same methodical attention I'd bring to any complex problem, and I looked at it from every angle. What I found, each time, was the same wall. It wasn't built of anger. I want to be clear about that. The anger had moved through me quickly, cleaner than I expected, and what remained wasn't resentment or the desire for punishment. What remained was simply the knowledge, arrived at honestly, without drama, that I could not get there from here. I could not reconstruct the specific kind of trust that our marriage had been built on, because that trust had been built on a version of Lisa that I now understood was incomplete. Not false. Not performed. Just incomplete. And the version I now knew, the one who had held another man's hand across a candlelit table and come home smiling and called it productive, I didn't know how to love that version the way I'd loved the one before. That's not nobility. It's just the truth. I called her and told her. She listened. She didn't argue. She asked, quietly, if I was certain. I said yes. She said she understood, and that she was sorry, and that she hoped I would be okay. And I told her, sincerely, that I hoped the same for her. The legal process began with a meeting with a solicitor and proceeded the way legal processes do, slowly, formally, with a great deal of paperwork. Lisa engaged her own representation. Both of us wanted it to be straightforward, and for the most part it was. 10 years of shared life untangled with more grace than it might have, because neither of us wanted to make things smaller than they already felt. The apartment was mine. We sold some things and divided others. Personal items returned by arrangement, cordially, without drama. The last time I saw her was the day she collected the final box of her things. We stood in the hallway for a moment afterward, and I think we were both aware that this was an ending that didn't have a ceremony for it, no witnesses, no formal words, just two people in a hallway at the end of 10 years. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," I said. She nodded. She left. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment in the quiet. Then I went to make coffee. I stayed with that quietness for a long time. Not in mourning exactly, or not only in mourning. Something else was accumulating alongside the grief. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years, possibly longer than the betrayal itself. The clarity of a person who has been released, against his will, from something he didn't know was constraining him. I'd been good at marriage. Good at the routines, the maintenance, the care. I'd been less good at noticing when the foundation was shifting. That's a real failure, and I own it. Not for the affair, that was her choice, fully and completely. But for the years of comfortable incuriosity. For the questions I didn't ask because I preferred the answers I was already living with. I realized I hadn't been building a marriage. I'd been maintaining the appearance of one, and telling myself that was the same thing. The difference between those two things was exactly the distance between what I thought we had and what we actually had. And I had walked that distance for a long time without knowing it. I began, slowly, to change my routines. Not dramatically. I'm not the kind of person who moves cities or reinvents everything. I started with small things, running in the mornings, which I hadn't done in 3 years. Calling people I'd drifted from. Cooking things that were complicated and took a long time. Sitting in my own company without needing to fill it. Mark remained a constant. Dinner every couple of weeks, phone calls in between, the reliable, uncomplicated presence of someone who knew me before any of this happened and would know me after. I don't think I've ever adequately told him what that meant. I should. Work expanded into the space that other things had occupied. I took on a project I'd been deferring, a large-scale transport study for the city, and found myself genuinely absorbed in it in a way I hadn't been absorbed in work for a while. There's something quietly restorative about problems that have real, mappable solutions. About laying a grid over complexity and finding out where things want to move. 6 months after the restaurant, I went back one evening. Not to table 4. I didn't need to revisit that specifically. I just happened to walk by on an evening when I was in that part of the city, and I looked through the tall windows at the room inside, the candlelit tables, the people in conversation, the particular warmth of a restaurant in full swing on a Friday night. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I felt something quieter. Not indifference, not quite. More like the experience of looking at the site of something that happened and finding it return to ordinary use. The table was just a table. The room was just a room. Whatever had happened there had happened to a version of my life that I was no longer living, and the person standing on the sidewalk was real and present and, gradually, all right. I walked on. I don't know what happened between Lisa and James. I didn't ask, and no one told me, and I found I genuinely didn't need to know. Whatever that relationship was or became, whether it dissolved or continued or transformed into something else, was entirely outside the story I was trying to write for myself. She had made her choices. I had made mine. The rest belonged to her. What I kept, after everything, was harder to name than what I lost. A clearer sense of my own baseline. A sharper recognition of the difference between comfort and happiness, between peace and avoidance. An understanding that the kindest thing you can do for yourself, sometimes, is ask the question you've been walking around. And Mark, sitting across from me at dinner one evening, telling me I seemed lighter. Do I? I said. Yeah, he said. Different. But lighter. I thought about that for a moment. I think I am, I said. And I meant it. Not as performance. Not as the conclusion to a narrative with a tidy upward line. Just as a fact, arrived at slowly, through a lot of ordinary days spent choosing to move forward instead of staying still. The door to what we were is closed. I closed it. I'm certain it was the right thing. And on the other side of it, something I haven't fully seen yet is beginning to take shape, slow and quiet, the way cities grow, one decision at a time, one intersection at a time, until one day you look up and find that something has been built. There's a particular cruelty in being betrayed by someone who loved you genuinely at the same time they were lying to you. Not a staged love, not a tactical love, a real one, layered alongside the deception, both things true simultaneously. That's the detail in this story that causes the deepest damage, and it's the detail that makes it hardest to process cleanly. Ethan didn't lose a fraud. He lost something real. And those are two very different griefs. What emerges most clearly across the full arc of this story is how betrayal is rarely a single event. It's an accumulation, a slow construction of small departures from truth, each one individually survivable, collectively devastating. Lisa didn't make one catastrophic choice. She made hundreds of minor ones, stretched across 7 months, each tilted screen, each rehearsed answer, each evening that ended with a practiced smile and an unlocked door. The cumulative weight of those choices is what made reconciliation impossible. Not the night in the restaurant, not the photograph, not even the confrontation over candlelight, but the long, continuous effort of deceiving someone who had given her every reason to trust. Ethan's role in this is worth examining without sentimentality. His blind spot, a deeply ingrained preference for equilibrium over interrogation, was a real structural weakness in the marriage, and it likely created conditions where distance could grow unchecked. He was not a passive victim in the sense of being blameless. He was a man who had learned to equate the absence of conflict with the presence of health, and that equation is one of the more quietly destructive assumptions a person in a long relationship can carry. Comfort had become his compass, and comfort is a poor instrument for detecting slow-moving damage. And yet, and this matters, that weakness does not distribute responsibility for Lisa's choices. Understanding how a lock became easier to pick does not shift blame to the door. What it does is offer something more valuable than blame, a lesson. The relationship between attention and intimacy is direct and continuous. You cannot maintain something you've stopped looking at clearly. Ethan had stopped looking. Not maliciously. Not negligently by the usual definition. Just quietly, gradually, in the way that people who feel safe often do. What the story ultimately reveals about trust is that it is not a state, it's a practice. And like all practices, it requires not just faith but maintenance. The kind of maintenance that involves asking the uncomfortable question, not because you distrust the person, but because you respect them enough to engage with the full reality of who they are becoming, not just the version you settled into loving. Lisa's psychology throughout the story is never reducible to simple selfishness. She was a person who had drifted, slowly, possibly without full awareness of the distance, into a life that no longer fit her in the way it once had. That doesn't justify a single decision she made. But it explains the particular shape her betrayal took, not dramatic, not bold, but incremental and half-concealed even from herself. She wasn't lying to Ethan because she'd decided he didn't matter. She was lying because she hadn't yet summoned the courage or clarity to face what she was actually doing. That kind of self-deception is perhaps the most common architecture of infidelity, not cruelty, but the elaborate avoidance of an honest conversation that might have changed everything. Ethan's decision not to forgive deserves to be understood on its own terms, not as bitterness and not as pride. He attempted it, genuinely, methodically, in the way he approached every complex problem. He gave it real consideration and arrived at a real conclusion. Some damage changes the molecular structure of a thing. Not permanently, he is, by the end, clearly moving towards something new, but it changes it in ways that make rebuilding the original form impossible. What he chose, in the end, was not the closed door of refusal but the open space of a different kind of future. That distinction is subtle but important. The story ends not in triumph, but in something quieter and more sustainable, a man who has found the ground beneath his own feet again, and who is learning to walk on it without the weight of pretending. What stays with me about this story isn't the betrayal itself, it's the silence around it. All the moments where an honest word could have changed everything, the question Ethan didn't ask, the conversation Lisa never started, the truth that sat between them for months while both of them moved around it carefully. We talk about infidelity as a dramatic event, something that happens suddenly. But in reality it rarely does. It builds in the spaces between people when those people stop being willing to inhabit those spaces honestly. What would you do differently, not if you discovered what Ethan discovered, but before? In the ordinary evenings, the unremarkable Tuesdays, when something feels slightly off and you choose comfort over clarity? That's where it actually starts. And that's where it can actually be stopped.